So an agistment is the right for a livestock grazier to graze stock of a certain type for a certain period of time on a landowner's land. The difference between an agistment agreement and a lease is that a lease is the right for a tenant to hold the land to the exclusion of all others for that certain area that they're taking on, as opposed to agistment being just the right of access to graze stock. So an agistment agreement is important because it sets out the rights and responsibilities of each party. It sounds like a bit of a cliche, but there are a lot of things that can go wrong with stock, of course, and it's difficult sometimes to determine why that went wrong, whether they got out because a fence was down or a gate was left open, or whether they grazed, for instance, weeds that might have been poisonous or something along those lines. If it's detailed in the agreement whose responsibility it is to maintain fencing, for instance, or to spray weeds and ensure that noxious weeds aren't, or poisonous weeds aren't on the land, well then the parties know what the rules are, and then they can carry it forward and go forward with confidence. The most common things that need to go into an agistment agreement are the description of the livestock, and that's got two main reasons that would be described. One is to make sure that there's security and we know what ear tag numbers are grazing the land, for instance. So if they get out, we know who they belong to. Make sure that the grazier is not agreeing to, for instance, put lambs on the property but then end up grazing heavier sheep, ewes, for instance. Another key term is, of course, the rate payable. Sometimes rates will be calculated on a cents per kilogram for live weight gained, which can be really beneficial for both parties because it means that the landowner is going to get something out of treating that animal well, and obviously that's only really in relation to fattening stock, and they'll be more inclined to keep a close eye on their welfare. In most cases though, it's on a dollars per head basis, which is just generally calculated off the agent's recommendation or DPI recommendation, and that's generally done that way for a short-term scenario. Other terms that need to go in there, of course, are about the responsibilities of each party, insurance and risk, and who's responsible for the risk of livestock or the risk of damage to infrastructure. Obviously, we need terms in there around how long the agistment is to go for, which can sometimes depend on seasonality. So a lot of the terms are similar to the terms in a lease, but of course there isn't the term as there would be in a lease about the rights to the land. Necessarily, it's just an access, a licence in most cases, and so that's the real difference between the two there. Some of the most common things that we see that go wrong with agistment arrangements is there's no real agreement in some cases, especially with verbal arrangements, when a grazier is to remove stock, who is responsible for the livestock while they're there. So in some cases, graziers think, well, I've got them there, the owner's going to keep an eye on them for me, and doesn't really pay the due attention that they require. And all of a sudden, there's cattle that have jumped a fence or broken through a fence, and everyone starts pointing fingers. In some cases, that'll be a quick fix. But in other cases it can become quite tenuous because, for instance, cattle break through a fence, get on a road, someone hits them in a car, then it becomes a serious issue. So we overcome those issues by setting that out in the agreement, putting as much detail around the agreement and the rights and responsibilities and all of the risks involved. Another issue that can come up with agistment is flows from that right and responsibility of each party is how long stock are grazed on the property for. It goes both ways. Sometimes landowners want stock there for as long as possible and don't take too much notice of the condition that they're in and the condition of their pastures, because they're getting a weekly per head rate, or a grazier wants the stock there as long as possible because they don't have somewhere for them to go. That can become quite awkward. In the former situation, it can have a real effect on the hip pocket of the grazier because animals lose condition. They've then got to either get them back up to condition to try and get them in lamb, or to get them back up to condition to try and sell them.